A joint public hearing with the Planning Board and the City Council was held in the Council Chamber on Monday, September 17th, 2018 at 6:30 p.m. for the purpose of discussing an ordinance to amend an ordinance relative to zoning, Section 3.0, Table of Principal and Accessory Uses, and Section 10.0, Definitions relating to short-term rentals. Notice of this meeting was posted on August 24th, 2018 at 1:16 p.m. and advertised in the Salem News on August 30th, 2018 and September 10th, 2018. President Beth Gerard, that's me, presided, and then I introduced the members of the Planning Board. We have Chair Ben Anderson, Helen Sides, Matt Smith, Carol Hamilton, Kurt Reeder, and Matt Vino. So should we start? Does anybody want me to read the ordinance, or are we waiving the reading, and should we just?
Waive the reading.
Okay, great. So we will waive the reading of the ordinance, and I also want to acknowledge that we have from the city, we also have Vicki Caldwell, the Assistant City Solicitor, as well as Dominic Pangallo, the Chief of Staff. Trying to think who should start us off. Vicki, do you?
Is that ordinance long? Because I don't have a
You're welcome. Okay, so Council McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam President. I receive no objection. I move that we open up and allow Vicki Caldwell to address us and tell us how we got here and what's in front of us.
Okay. I don't see a microphone there, but so do you want to just go to the podium?
Hello, everyone. We're here today on a zoning ordinance, which is a companion piece to what was passed by the City Council for first passage last week. There's a new section in the general ordinance in section 15.2 that permits and regulates short-term rentals. And the companion to that is the zoning piece that is here before the joint meeting of the Planning Board and the City Council that would allow the grandfathering of existing non-owner occupied short-term rentals such that those that were in existence on the day that we filed the ordinance, which I believe was July 19th, I want to say, could remain subject to the process that's detailed in this ordinance amendment, which defines what a non-owner occupied short-term rental is, and that is a dwelling unit where the owner does not live in either the unit, the building, or otherwise on the property, which was being used as a short-term rental prior to the date of the general ordinance. Chapter 15, short-term rentals, was filed with the city clerk for consideration by the City Council. And it goes on to define a short-term rental as a rental for less than 30 days for a fee. And then you have your use table, and it shows what where a non-owner occupied short-term rental, which is only a grandfathered use, where it would be allowed. And it would be allowed only by special permit in this proposal in the R2, the R3, the B1, the B2, the B4, and the B5. The idea behind the ordinance was to balance, the ordinance as a whole, including the zoning piece, was to balance the interests in the city. We know there are some existing non-owner occupied short-term rentals in the city that are in districts where we allow bed and breakfasts and rooming houses and lodging houses, and we thought the opportunity to have a special permit process for those who are there already would put everybody on a level playing field, and the special permit process would be such that if it was a non-owner occupied short-term rental that wasn't well received by the neighborhood or wasn't abiding by neighborhood standards, that could be vetted out through the special permit process and the conditions and requirements that people who come before the ZBA to get a special permit have to meet in any case. There's a list of conditions.
Sorry, ma'am, we're going to save questions until the end.
Anyway, the special permit conditions,
closer if you could.
which are contained in the zoning ordinance, which you can look up there online. And as our planning board knows, and our zoning board certainly knows, what the conditions that everyone has to meet when they come to get a special permit, whether they are seeking any kind of use that a special permit is required for. And typically speaking, that means that it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing use prior. What else? So we think that this is a balanced approach. It's not meant to be the perfect approach. It meant to balance the interests of the community and to keep neighborhoods, the integrity of the neighborhoods by disallowing non-owner occupied short-term rentals in most circumstances. It's only those that are existing or in existence as of July 19th. The overall ordinance for the benefit of the planning board was modeled on what Boston has done. Boston eliminated all non-owner occupied short-term rentals, and we created a zoning amendment to allow those that were in existence and meet the criteria for a special permit to remain. And so long as they're in existence in a district where lodging, bed and breakfast, and rooming houses are allowed. So one of the things that's been discussed a lot about this whole ordinance is that in a R1 district, rooming houses, lodging houses, and bed and breakfast are not allowed. So there is no grandfathering of an existing non-owner occupied short-term rental in an R1 district under this proposal. And so there's no opportunity to grandfather those. And that's, I think that's the sum of it. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so I saw Council McCarthy's hand up and Council Terrio's, but just for everyone else here, I just wanted to quickly mention, well, first of all, that Councilor Milo is not here for the record, but also want to mention that the process that we're going to go through for those of you who haven't been to a joint public hearing before is that I'm going to open up questions to the councilors first, then to the planning board, and then to the public. So on that note, Councilor McCarthy and then Councilor Terrio.
Thank you, Madam
And then
President. Through you to Vicky. Vicky, just for clarification, so everyone has the chart in front of them. So, doesn't matter if you're non-owner occupied, so if you're in investment property, whatever you want to call it, and you already exist, but if we adopt the table as is, if you're non-owner occupied in RC, R1, industrial, and BPD, that means as per the ordinance we passed, first passage the other day, as of April 15th, they have to cease and desist.
Correct.
So just that's for everyone's clarification, there's no, so, I mean, I know a lot of people are concerned when they hear the word grandfather, and the grandfathering is for the non-owner occupies that are in this chart, that are in the BA, meaning board approvals. That means they have the opportunity to maintain if they so desire to, because it would be allowed with board approval in those zones.
Yeah, and in the general ordinance it says they would have 60 days to go before the Board of Appeals. So if they choose not to go before the Board of Appeals within 60 days, they would be out in that case as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Terrio.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, the question that I have is one that came up from a constituent who is resident in the ward, in my ward, owns two properties, both of which do rentals. One of those, and I believe they would be okay, having looked up the address on the zone, but I wanted to sort of clarify. One of the they're both multifamily dwellings. He has a two-family where he and his wife are resident, and then the second unit is a long-term rental. And then he also owns a three-family where one of the units is his brother and sister-in-law are the main tenants there, and then they have another long-term rental, and then they have one short-term rental unit. So it's not directly owner-occupied, but it's the immediate family of the owner there. So would a situation like that in a place, where would a situation like that fall?
It looks like if they're in a multifamily, they're most likely in an R2 or an R3, so they could get a special permit without being owner-occupied. And that's what the way it's written, that's how we would view that.
And Councilor Madore.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you. Two questions. Why is NRCC blank? And secondly, I think it would be helpful to clarify the language in regards to grandfathering in the ordinance, in the section itself. Because it's not clear that this only applies to the grandfathering.
The grandfathering really is in the definition of non-owner occupied short-term rental. because it details that it was being used as a short-term rental prior to the date the general ordinance was filed. So it doesn't apply to any other non-owner occupied uses other than those that were in existence at the time the ordinance draft was filed. What was your other question, Councilor Medora?
Why is NRCC?
Oh, NRCC blank. NRCC blank, it was blank originally because we don't usually include the NRCC in our use table. It's a whole separate section of the zoning ordinance, and we were going to leave that out because it was, there's issues around having a whole redo of the NRCC because it's its own piece. But Councilor Dibble asked that we advertise and put it in correctly so that if the council wants to allow for it in the NRCC, that we can do so. So that's up to you.
I actually have a question. So do we know of any short-term rentals, non-owner occupied in R1s at all?
I am aware of some.
Okay, so
We don't have a count. One of the things, with some sort of people who've used Airbnb know, is that you don't really get the address of the property until you book. And so we don't have a way right now of having a clear handle on what the number is in any different district, but I do know that there are some.
So those people potentially are
They're
out no
investor-owned
matter what,
properties,
come
yes, yeah.
April 15th.
Yeah.
Any other counselors have any questions at this time? No, then any planning board members with any questions? Kurt, and then Ben.
Would you be able to hazard a guess on the quantity in R2 and R3?
Dominic, correct me, I think we've been told, we've had some communication with a host compliance company that's been able to give us some information, in the event that we, contract with them down the road to help us with compliance. And they hazard a guess that we have around 200 total in the city. So I don't know where they are and where they're not.
So that preempts my second question. How that breaks out to the D155, so
Yeah.
you say 200 total
Yeah.
without a breakdown. My final question would be, do you have a sense of whether Boston had a sunset for these properties that were?
They had a September, they enacted a few months ago, and they had I think they're allowed to stay until September 2019 or 20, I'm not sure. First of the year? I thought it was September for some reason in my head, but yeah, they had a date, yeah. And our council on Thursday put in an April 15th date for the enactment of the general ordinance.
Right, so in effect,
It was yeah.
Ben?
Through you, Chair. I have a question. We're specifying non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Do we have a sense of owner occupied short-term rentals, and are they allowed, and are they allowed in the same districts?
In the general ordinance that was passed on Thursday, we're allowing owner occupied short-term rentals.
Can we get a copy of that? To
Yeah.
the planning board, because I haven't seen it.
Yeah, we'll get you a copy of that. I'll give it to Ashley, and she'll have it for you. Anyway, yes, they'll be allowed in they'll be considered a residential use. It'll be allowed in any district. And the three types that are being allowed are where it's your primary residence, which is defined as 6 months or more in a year. You're allowed to, say you wanted to go away for Halloween for the month, you could rent out your primary residence for a month under the general ordinance, and without any reason to go into zoning, put it that way. And then you're allowed to, if you have what we call an owner adjacent unit, which is if you own a two-family and instead of renting out to long-term tenants, you rent out your other unit where you are living on the property, you rent out your other unit on a short-term basis. You're allowed to do that under the ordinance as well. So those are in R1s and R2s and R3s. And you're also allowed to, if you're living there, to rent out up to 2 rooms on a short-term basis. The people who want to do the share, we're calling that a limited share unit, but that's the idea that if you want to open up your house to a tourist, you can use up to 2 rooms as long as you are there. The concept behind the ordinance was creating a system where, or creating a scheme where trying to preserve neighborhoods because, and favoring those kinds of short-term uses where the owner is there, or the owner is, it's their primary residence, or they're there on the property all the time. So if there are problems, if there are issues with the neighborhood and the character of the character of the neighborhood being changed by this use, that the owner will be around to address that. The owner will be vested, as opposed to an investor-owned unit where there is no stake in the neighborhood, put it that way. And so in an attempt to sort of balance interests, we went with the zoning piece to grandfather in those that are in areas where the use might be appropriate, that are already there, subject to a special permit process.
So the one that was passed is not a zoning ordinance? It's
No,
just
it's a general ordinance, yeah.
Okay, that's it, thank you.
Any further questions from planning board members at this time? Matt?
Madam President, just a follow-up to Ben's question, and it kind of relates to Councilor Turiel's earlier question. So in the case where in the ordinance, actually not this ordinance, but the ordinance that you referenced, if owner occupied, but it's a relative of the owner, is that it wouldn't seem to qualify if it's not actually the owner, but it's the owner's family. Is that?
Correct, yeah.
Councilman, or Matt, were you all set?
Yeah,
Okay.
just a comment, which is that it's a little hard to consider the zoning ordinance without the context of the ordinance that you guys already passed, so.
Council McCarthy?
Thank you, Madam President. Through you to Vicky. I guess in response to that question, it would be, even though it would be the owner's family living in the building, it would still be at that point, it would be considered a non-owner occupied use, of which when it's as long as it's not in an R1 or an RC, it's in an R2, then they could apply for the special permit and get it that way, without changing ownership of the building and trying to do something to make it that way. As long as, I would assume, I don't know the particulars of this particular case, but I would assume that if these individuals have been running it this way and there's been no complaints, and I wouldn't see that there would be an issue, but that would be the way it would be. That's the way I would see the intent of that would be to go through even though they own it, but the relative is like managing it or looking over it or whatever it is, I would assume they'd have to go through the non-owner occupied. Is that correct, Vicki?
Yes.
Matt?
Yeah, so I'm a little confused about why in R1 it can be grandfathered in, but in R2, R3 it can be. So if you have, for instance, a single family home in R2, that can be grandfathered in, but in R1 there's special treatment?
R1 is because in an R1 you're not allowed to have a lodging, a rooming house, or a bed and breakfast. So it's sort of preserving the character of the R1 neighborhoods in that sense.
Councilor Peterson?
Thank you, Madam President. Through you. I just want to kind of follow this conversation thread that's been happening. One situation just came to mind that was brought up in public comment at different points. So I just want to know if this was considered as this table was coming together. Say there's someone who lives in an R1. They've had a owner-occupied property, and they're elderly, let's say, and they go into a nursing home or an extended hospitalization with the hope that maybe someday they'd return to their home. And to preserve that property and to kind of keep it going, they have their family member move in. How would that fit into the scenario, or would that be disallowed?
The family member could certainly move in.
No, but I mean, and then rent out the room to pay the mortgage, let's say.
If the person is a renter of a property where they have the permission of the owner to do a limited share or one of these other things, yes, they could technically do it.
Okay.
Any further questions? Councilor Terrio, and then Matt, you know.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you. So basically, the difference in that kind of scenario is a direct. You're talking about the owner, the or whatever, but that's renting a room or something out of the unit as, in the short term, as opposed to renting the unit, which is really what we're looking at within this framework.
In a sense, yeah.
So so take that example and extend it so that if that elderly homeowner went into extended care, they wouldn't be able to then take that house, the single family house, because it's not an allowed use, and list it on Airbnb while they're in rehab or whatever that might be.
Technically, no.
They would have to have someone in.
Okay, Matt?
Thank you through you, Madam President. So, look, in the zoning ordinance, we've included the definition for short-term rental. Is there, and I apologize, I don't have my zoning ordinance with me, there must be some reference otherwise in the zoning ordinance for us to need to include a definition of short-term rental here? Because there's no reference in what's before me other than the definition to short-term rental.
Yeah, there are definitions in the zoning. We're creating another thing like lodging or rooming house or bed and breakfast. We're creating another definition like that.
But we're not, at least in this amendment, creating any requirements.
No.
So is there a reference to short-term rentals in the zoning ordinance irrespective of this amendment?
No.
So why are we including a definition to something in the ordinance that has no practical import?
Well,
in the zoning?
it has a practical import to the table. It's a
So
use.
that's my question.
Yeah.
So is there another reference to short-term rental in the zoning ordinance that's not part of this amendment? Because there is no reference in this amendment to just short-term rental.
No.
I'm a little confused.
Counselor Dibble and then Kurt.
Because the question, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Just so that I'm clear, I'm asking why is there a definition for short-term rental in the amendment?
It's, well, because there's a non-owner occupied short-term rental is defined.
Which is defined.
Yeah, so maybe we could roll in to get the 30-day piece in there, the short-term rental.
If it only relates to the non-owner occupied short-term rental, then I would suggest that be
Rolled
just
in.
one definition.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You all set? Counselor Dibble.
Thank you, Madam President. To answer my good friend Mr. Vino's question, the fifth paragraph of page 2 of the other ordinance, it's on page 2, the fifth paragraph. It should have been its own section, where it's italicized at the end of the residential unit paragraph. It says short-term rentals, and it is defined. So there is a definition for short-term, but it got blended into a differant paragraph.
That's not in the zoning ordinance, it's in the general ordinance, yeah.
I'm talking about the zoning ordinance. You have a definition in the zoning ordinance, and I've been wanting to know why.
Okay, but it's hidden in here, and it's a typo. It should have been...
That's not the zoning ordinance.
Okay. If I can continue?
Yes.
Vicky, thank you for getting the NRCC added to the table, but we didn't
Thank you.
put a category on it. And when I asked for it to be added, I said I didn't care which category it went into for purpose of discussion, but I think it should go into the BA, the Board of Appeals, like many of the other zones are, is my personal preference, but I think that we should discuss it with the planning board while they're here. They're going to leave and make their recommendation, come back with a recommendation, but my recommendation would be that BA be added to the NRCC. So we're not just excluding a section of the city. We need to define what is allowed there. Lastly, if I can continue, Madam President?
Yes, you have the floor.
I know that parking is not before us, and the grandfathering I have some trouble with, because if we're grandfathering one property in any given zone, the property right next door, because they're coming late to the whole process, they can't do it. So the grandfathering I have some trouble with. Separately, on the table of contents that we're looking at here, table of contents, geez, number 486, the non-owner occupied short-term rental. I'm wondering if we could just firm up the wording on this, because I've read this thing 6 times now, and it's a little bit confusing. It's one long run-on sentence, and it has the short-term rental prior to the date of general ordinance stuck in the middle of it.
and I just don't want to see any loopholes being created. So I know what you're trying to say here, but I don't think you say it.
Thank you. Before I go to Kurt, I would say that I also do agree with Councilor Devil that where the NRCC is largely in Ward 6 and where we are building multi-units, that it should follow along with the R2 and R3, et cetera. So I would recommend that that be board appeal as well. Kurt.
For you, the question I have may or may not have been preempted by the prior discussion, but would it not help clarify what's before us tonight to add another line to the table that addresses where and where not the short-term rental is allowable for? That seems like the most cut and dry way to take a definition, have it applicable to X, Y, and Z, but not RST.
And I think we would need to have the different types of short-term rentals laid out too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just to follow
Matt.
up on that, if I may. So absent that addition to the zoning ordinance, it's unclear to me whether short-term rental, aside from non-owner occupied short-term rental, isn't allowed use anywhere in the city. Right? It doesn't exist anywhere else in the zoning ordinance.
It's considered a residential use.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, unless you address it specifically, it will just exist as an allowed use in any residential area.
Under these permit, you know, under the regulations detailed in the general ordinance.
Owner occupied.
Yes, and or owner adjacent.
So it won't
Yeah.
be treated in any way different from just a residential use if it's owner occupied.
Other than the body of regulations that limit and require rules be followed and what have you in the general ordinance.
Would that
Kurt.
definition then not be more appropriately labeled as owner occupied short-term rental? Just to help clarify, because of 15 or so of us are all looking at each other trying to make sense of it.
To have another line for owner occupied short-term
Well, no,
rental.
adding in front of short-term rental, owner occupied short-term rental as 6 words instead of 3.
Ah,
5 words instead of 3.
I got you.
Anyone else from the planning board or from the council before I open it up to the public? Ben?
I'm going to disagree a little bit with Kurt and Matt. I think in my reading of the short-term rental, this is going to go in the definitions section of the zoning ordinance. To me, what it's telling us is basically it's rental of a unit for less than 30 days. Right? And that seems to be a pretty definitive statement about what a short-term rental is. It's not trying to define non-owner occupied or owner occupied. It's just strictly talking about what a short-term rental is.
Why? Because there's no requirement that relates to it.
Because there's nothing in the zoning ordinance today. There needs to be a definition in there.
Why
To refer
define
to-
it if you have no requirements? It's like,
Well, that's what these are. That's what this amendment is.
no, not as it relates to short-term rentals that are not non-owner occupied short-term rentals.
Right, but those are referred back to the city's ordinance. That's not something that.
But there's a
but
definition
that-
of short-term rentals in the city's ordinance. It doesn't need to be in the zoning ordinance unless it's a zoning requirement. Sorry.
I know.
Yeah.
We'll
Like, you guys know better.
we'll have an opportunity to discuss this in our meeting, so I don't hold up the,
Okay, great. Councilor Terrell?
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the to our conflicted members of the planning board. I was just saying that to me the logic in defining short-term rentals here within the zoning ordinance is that it's a fairly simple. One is it's a fairly simple definition, and two is that we may at some point amend the table further. Right now, we're looking at non-owner or occupied short-term rental and defining that whereas the owner-occupied definition itself is being covered by the general ordinance. But as we go forward, we're basically looking at this, we're defining short-term rentals in general, and then specifically those short-term rentals that are non-owner occupied. So they build upon each other, although they're kind of printed in the reverse order in a sense. And then the table deals specifically with the short-term rentals that are non-owner occupied. Because at this time, we've chosen not to make any table changes for the owner-occupied ones.
Did I see any other hands up? Anybody else from the board? Okay, so I am going to open it up to public comment. Why don't we, if I go around the room from my left across, so when you come up to the podium, if you could state your name and address for the record, and then we can continue our discussion. So anybody here? Sir, and ma'am, then you're next.
Hi, how are you? I'm Brian Burns from 64 Gardner Street in Peabody. I am a owner of 5 non-owner occupied Airbnb units in Salem on Hawthorne Boulevard, 24 Hawthorne Boulevard. And it would be hypocritical of me to say that I was in favor of any regulation whatsoever for Airbnb, because it's been a very, good operation for me there. It's actually finding that it's probably, in that location, probably one of the best uses for my building, as opposed to permanent residence, because not just permanent residents, but it's a part of the city where I think permanent residents of the city want tourists to be, and it's a part of the city where tourists want to be. So I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you for, considering those existing units and possibly grandfathering and allowing them to continue. And I don't want to debate the pros and cons of having Airbnbs or not. That might be something that can be done at the second, hearing later in the month. But for what it's worth, I'd like to say thank you for allowing them to continue. And I also look forward to the opportunity to share with the city and the zoning board and the health department, whoever else wants to see, my record of how I've been operating them and comply with all the new regulations and such. And, I think I'll be one of those model, I forget where to send the ordinance, but, the person that you want to have running it, so.
Thank you. Ma'am? And Brian, are you Brian with an I or a Y?
With an I.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Susan, Lemon Street. Next time
I'm
I
sorry,
come,
Susan, what's
I
your
will
last name?
understand all these abbreviations.
I'm sorry,
but
Susan, what's your last name?
Matula.
Thank you.
I live next door to a non-owner occupied, and now the tenant who used to live there and runs these short-term rentals has also set up in the RV park on Winter Island, and the second floor is for different rotating sets of guests. I've had problems with all the cigarette butts. I've had problems with the shoveling. I've documented them with photos. I returned from vacation and got information from my neighbor about longer-term rentals that left based on the short-term rental tumult, and also the ground floor tenant left. So we have a lot of turnover. The tenant that runs it, who doesn't live there now, has taken it upon herself to paint the curb yellow and white and put no parking. And I find it very disruptive. And you know where to drive into your driveway, but when it comes to a nor'easter on January 4th, you're shoveling into mine and onto my sidewalk. And I leaned out the window because you couldn't walk out my door, and I said that, stop, because I'm responsible for that, even though it's sidewalk in front of my driveway. Laughing, waving, haha, 4 people. The tenant that runs the short-term rentals and 3 there. And I did send a police car. And I did speak to the owner, non-occupying owner, who has property in Salem, is not concerned, didn't bother to call me or write me, but had a roommate and a housemate say next time we're going to get someone to shovel in a nor'easter. So as much as I support tourism, I'm sorry we're not having the carnival, I have a property interest, time-wise and financial, and it really picking up after people, cleaning up after people, having you block the driveway. Other residents are complaining, and I've witnessed police calls where the organizing tenant comes out one door and there's one police officer in the car, and the complaining tenant comes out the other door. There's a different police officer in the car. I know the address. I'm sure I could get the police report, but I encourage you, whatever this process is where you have permitting and hearing, to look at that. And I can also just say, after all my frustration, I'm sorry to see the nicer tenants that live there feel pushed out and threaten litigation. But I'm not sure what the definitions mean, but this owner and the previous owner, unless Patriot Properties didn't update the listings, it's listed as a zone for two-family, and it was operated with 3 separate residences. With the current owner no longer occupying, lived in one and rented 2 floor-throughs. So like, let's not reward people who don't operate legally in the first place. I'm going to be interested in learning about the definitions and the permitting process, and do have some monitoring, because you have an interest in your property and you're quiet, and when all of a sudden it's rotating and noisy, and parking and snow and cigarettes. They had chairs, they don't allow smoking in the house, but the chairs are up against my fence with an overflowing ashtray all blown into my yard. I'm sorry, I think that you should, run it better, and to have a whole floor emptied, and even the former tenant living someplace else. I don't think the RV park goes past October 31st, so there will be some change. I hope the first floor, that the long-term, my neighbor said she lived there about 10 years, very nice, quiet tenant, nice dog, moved out Labor Day weekend. I hope it's not going to be turned into 4 more, having 8, but this gets to be excessive. And it does affect the way you live and the way, they throw their butts in. I even had one guy urinate in the yard, and I didn't understand. I told my neighbor, I said, he urinated in the backyard, and then he went in, and I could see him go up, and I could see him walk. Well, I didn't understand that the second floor was 4 rooms rented to 4 different people. And just yesterday, pulling weeds and being home today, I saw 3 different parties. They have a cleaning lady. The cleaning lady comes either by Uber or with a ride, but you want to make some money. I didn't move next door to a lodging house. I live there now. I hope the first floor doesn't turn into that, but I'm going to be very interested in seeing what this process does. Maybe you should look back 10 years and you have a census. If people filled it out, you're going to see there's 3 parties in your zone for 2, like I said, unless the zoning was not updated. But it gets to be a bit much when you have your property interest in your peace and quiet, and it's a total overturn all the time, and there have to be limits. And I'll meet my counselor, Ms. Medor, and find out what these definitions are and what that building is, and because I know from other neighbors too that it's a bit much.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of disruption.
In terms of the purpose of this hearing, we're discussing grandfathering or not grandfathering these types, non-owner occupied and owner occupied short-term rentals. So are you in favor of grandfathering, not in favor of grandfathering?
I don't want short-term rentals that are abusive and excessive.
Okay.
And I don't even have a response. So I looked at the regs for the Winter Island RV park, and you have to be in by a certain time and out by a certain time. You have to register. So, please look more deeply into how something is being run and look back and see, is it a legal building the way, was it maintained in a legal manner when the owner lived there? Now the owner doesn't live there, and I think doesn't care, because we have 2 boats, a car, a coat rack, a jacuzzi, all this on the lawn, not to mention all the cars, and it's become a junkyard and a rapid turnover place that 2 of the longer term, I know they were here when the snow was here, they left because they didn't like the way that it was being run. You don't want to live like that, whether you're next door or in the building. So please look at those things, because it makes a difference.
Thank you. Next, would you like to come up?
Darlene Mellis, 115 Federal Street. Just a question, what's the difference between an Airbnb and a rooming house that when you get to the level that the lady just spoke of? Do we have a definition that you could share?
Vicki, do you have a definition?
The definition in the zoning ordinance and the general laws and the licensing requirements, there was 3 or more unrelated people in the house. And the general ordinance that was passed on Thursday prohibits owners of short-term rentals or Airbnbs from renting out individual rooms in their house unless they are actually physically present.
Doesn't sound like that matches what she just described.
No, but I would like to get the address of what she's talking.
Okay,
There
thank
may be
you.
other issues there that we can enforce against them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And anyone else on this side? Certainly, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Emily Gritters. I own 105 Derby Street down the street, and I lived there for 8 years, I think, before I got married and we moved to Hopkinton. And because we love our house so much and our condo and want to come back and stay there often, we decided to Airbnb this summer. Our neighbors are very positive about it. We're very open. It's a duplex style, so the back was a little apprehensive beforehand, which is understandable. And now they're really happy with it. They think it's really quiet. The people that are there are very nice guests. I just want to thank you for your time and for considering this grandfathering, and to know that not just because it's not owner occupied doesn't mean that the owner isn't there. We're there almost every week doing something, cleaning, being involved. We're very involved with our guests. We really enjoy interacting with them and providing them this service. So I think if you talk to any of my neighbors, they've called the police on the condo neighbor across the street and the long-term rental to my right, but never on my guests. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next, on this side of the room, does anybody want to, ma'am?
Hi, my name's Mary Kay Johnson. I live at 96 Bayview. And my question is, if this is an ordinance that is being enacted, and we already know that there are non-owner occupied in R1, how do you notify them of this change? And you don't know, you indicated that with Airbnb, we don't know how big this problem is. So are you relying on them to read our newspapers? Because some of these people don't even live in our town, or city, excuse me.
Vicki, or Dominic, do you have an answer as to how we were going to get the message out to people?
If you rent out your property, you're required to get a certificate of fitness right now, whether it's, and we would be notifying those folks who have given us certificate of fitness requests of the new ordinance. And also, we will be, working with a compliance outfit most likely to figure out who's what and where. And it would be an enforcement issue that we can do with the department.
All right. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry. So we're going to go around, and then I can come back to you. Okay. So, hi, Mr. Roderick. Long time no see.
I didn't wear my watch tonight.
But of course, name and address for the record.
Thank you, Madam President. Nice to see everyone, and thank you for your consideration and allowing us all to speak. It's very, very nice. First of all...
name and address for the record.
Sorry.
Even though we know you.
Dick Roderick, 7 Sutton Avenue, obviously Salem. Live down the Willows, have lived down there now for 11 years. This is our second home down there, as Josh pointed out at the last meeting. And I must say that we're delighted living where we live, but the city is made up of, I believe, 8 different wards. Within those wards, there are different precincts. Within those precincts, there are wonderful neighborhoods. And there are many, many wonderful neighborhoods in the city. That's why Salem is such a hot commodity right now. I believe the Willows is a great place to live. I personally would not want to live anywhere else. My daughter and her husband now live down there as well, so we're very fortunate in having them close with our grandsons. We are in R1, and I believe in the definition of an R1, independent businesses are not allowed by virtue of our laws. To allow non-owner occupied Airbnbs or short-term rentals in our neighborhood would be totally against everything that we believe in and everything that the law stands for. If non-owner occupied residences are allowed in R1s, what's to stop other businesses from moving in and taking away the character of all of these wonderful neighborhoods that we have in the city? I believe that in the proper zones and neighborhoods where these things are allowed, I see no problem grandfathering them. People have made investments, they deserve to reap their investments, but no investment is a guarantee that they'll get a return on their investment. That's why, fishing is called fishing and not catching. So I respect all of you here tonight to make hopefully the right decision. The board, the council's already passed the resolution banning non-owner occupied residences, and I hope the planning board will certainly go along with that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I also just want to mention to people, just so you know what the process is, that with a joint public hearing, that we are discussing this jointly, and then depending upon the outcome towards the end of the meeting, if we choose to close the public hearing, then we send it to the planning board. The planning board will deliberate it either at the next meeting on the 20th or at the following meeting, I think October 11th. And then they will come back, then they will send us a decision, and then we will then debate it some more. So I just wanted everyone to be aware of what the process is going forward. So
Thank you very much for your time.
Certainly. Hi, Mrs. Roderick.
Mary Roderick, 7 Sutton Avenue, Willows. My husband and I live in the Willows neighborhood. We had a short-term rental home next door to us for 2+ years. The owners were wonderful. They upgraded their property and landscaping. We had their contact numbers. On the whole, we had only a few problems with their renters. For that time, we had no true neighbors. They were just people passing through town. Keep in mind that most renters are on vacation. They tend to party more. They are not there as a working week. Our main concern is how our neighborhood could drastically change with non-owner occupied units. The Willows is a perfect area to set up a rental business. We are on the water with beaches. We have a wonderful park with a pier. There is an amusement and arcade area with restaurants, including Hobbs, which makes the best popcorn around. Winter Island Park is another gem in our area. It has a beach, boat ramp, camping, function hall, Fort Pickering, and much more. We also have all that Salem has to offer. We are a very close-knit community. We know our immediate neighbors and also most of the other residents in the neighborhood. We have a community club that is very active, and we have many events for our residents throughout the year. If our R1 neighborhood is allowed to have non-owner occupied units, investors will be sure to buy up as many homes as possible to rent as short-term rentals. To me, these are businesses in an R1 area. We would not like the Willows to become a summer rental resort. We live in a wonderful neighborhood. Please vote to keep non-owner occupied units out of our neighborhood. And please do not grandfather the non-owner units in R1 neighborhoods. I know the council has decided not to, but I don't know if the planning board can change that. So that was more to them. By the way, the rental home next to us was sold, and we are very fortunate to have a wonderful family as neighbors and friends, and they have added so much to our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. And ma'am, in the orange.
See if I can do this right this time. Kathy Picone, 25 Beach Avenue, Salem.
You got it.
And I've spoken before in front of the city council, but would like to speak to the planning board and the zoning board. I also live in the Willows, and we have watched this whole development of short-term rentals coming about. We have a number of neighbors who have done a beautiful job with their Airbnbs. They are respectful, they're knowledgeable of the area, they're knowledgeable of the culture of the neighborhood, which is so important, who to go to, who to talk to, and I also know that I can go and speak with them if there's an issue, a parking issue, or whatever. It makes it easier. So they've done a beautiful job. They're owner-occupied, short-term rentals, and it can work, and I think it is that respect issue that makes it work. We also have had some non-owner occupied short-term rentals, has not worked as well. There's no prior knowledge to where they can send their clients to park their cars, and so they're ending up in front of people's parking spaces or garages or whatever. So I support the R1, the owner-occupied, and I also think that the grandfathering till April 15th is probably in that area where people have purchased these properties and thinking that they can do the Airbnbs, that the April 15th date is important to them, and I would give them that consideration. So thank you very much, and thank you for letting us talk to you.
Nice to see you again. Then, Jeff, did you have your hand up? Or, okay, come on up.
Jeff Cohen, 12 Hancock Street, Salem. Two things. One is a little bit of context on the ordinance. B&Bs and inns are exempt, and the reason is because the zoning that applies to them entails that they have to adhere to certain rules. And those rules include one off-street parking spot for every unit they short-term rent, pretty expensive fire equipment. They pay, they're considered commercial, they pay their own trash pickup, and they pay commercial taxes. So people who pay commercial taxes on a multifamily or whatever, it can be as much as 50 to 100% more. I do want to address, because I am not in favor of grandfathering beyond April of next year, which is what the city council talked about. And the context there is that Boston spent 2 years, extensive research, and found over 2,000 units that were converted from long-term rental to short-term. And they passed they passed an ordinance, the most recent ordinance followed another ordinance, and it passed 11-2. And the grandfathering was until September of 2019. But the primary reason that they passed the ordinance was because of the diminished rental stock. And that's what I'm here to speak about. We are a city that everyone has talked about is a very popular place to live, but people who work here deserve to live here. And it's become increasingly more difficult. And there's been too many instances, as we're so popular not only for people to live here, but to come and visit, of people who have been purchased homes, and one way or another, the tenants have left. And those tenants, by and large, are not living in Salem anymore. And that's not what Salem was built upon. Although the person from Hawthorne Boulevard may be a great person and may treat the place well and care about his property and the people in the neighborhood, that's 5 units that have gone from long-term rentals to short-term. And this idea of virtual hotels has been talked about at the original public hearings that Councilor Dibble ran, and at the subsequent ones that Councilor McCarthy ran. So I am only for grandfathering non-owner occupied until April, primarily because this is a working class town that is built upon the neighborhood, and people who work here deserve to live here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on this side of the room? No? Okay. Councilors, what do we want to do? Council McCarthy, this is, do you want to move for the hearing to be closed, or do we want to?
Anyone else have a comment?
Does anybody, Ben?
I'd like to get a clarification from the Assistant City Solicitor. As far as parking and number of units, I'm assuming that's defined under the existing use and zoning district?
The only reference to parking in the general ordinance is the concept that you have to provide that information with respect to allowable off-street and off-street and on-street parking rules and regulations and fines, and provide that information to the people that you're renting to.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then the parking requirements and the zoning ordinance remain. Those are unchanged.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. Through you, just to follow up on that, so that would be, in these cases, something that parking would be taken up as part of the Board of Appeals process for getting that special permit?
Correct.
Any further questions? Councilor Dibble, and then Kurt.
Thank you, Madam President. If, through you to Vicky, if we could just clarify the parking issue once and for all, I think. At the Good Ward 1 Councilor's meeting that he chaired, we talked about parking, we talked about grandfathering a little bit, and the Ward 2 Councilor was against requiring parking in her ward, or I think mostly the downtown that she was referencing, which if we required parking for each bedroom, one space for each bedroom that we're renting out, everywhere in the whole city except for the B5. I'm wondering if that would be okay with the Ward 2 Council who spoke against the parking requirement? But can you clarify, Vicki, what is the parking requirement for these short-term rentals?
There's no parking requirement other than to provide information about parking in the general ordinance, which was passed at first passage on Thursday night. If someone is a grandfathered eligible for a special permit, should the bodies decide to go with this proposal, then that parking issue could become part of that special permit application process. Granted, if you, one of the things that is in the general ordinance with respect to parking is if you violate the rules that we have set forth in the ordinance with respect to parking or noise or trash requirements, those are things that could get you eliminated from being able to run a short-term rental under the general ordinance, you know, if you don't follow those rules. And that's how that's addressed with respect to parking.
Yep. Through our president, several people have alluded to how tonight we're voting on whether we should grandfather or not grandfather, but in this table of contents, it's not really clear how this is grandfathering anything. I don't see it here.
It's in the definitions and then in the table. And if you take the definition and you apply it to the table, that's where the grandfathering comes in.
As I understand it, whether it's owner occupied or not, or just one room that owner's renting, all of those need to go before the Board of Appeals for a permit. Is that correct?
only the grandfathered, there's no special permit process for any other than the non-owner occupied unit, whatever kind it is.
Are you all set, Counselor?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Kurt? No. Okay. Any further questions? Counselor McCarthy?
Thank you, Madam President. I move the hearing be closed.
Counselor McCarthy moves the hearing be closed. All those in favor? All those opposed? Matter carries. Counselor McCarthy?
Thank you, Madam President. I further move that this matter be referred to the planning board for their recommendation.
Counselor McCarthy moves that this be referred to that this matter be referred to the planning board for their recommendation. All those in favor? All those opposed? Matter carries. Counselor Fury?
Madam President, a motion to adjourn, please.
Counselor Fury motions to adjourn. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.